Welcome to the Leather Journey. I'm Dex, and we've been doing a playlist. I came up with an idea a couple months ago. As most people that have special interests, you from time to time buy a book that's related to your special interest. Of course, my special interest is leather and whips, so over 25 years or so in being interested in that type of thing, I've collected quite a library, a kinky library, if you will. So I had also decided that as I'm approaching the end of my journey, and hopefully I have 10 or 15 years left on this journey, but as I get toward the end of the journey, I didn't want to have a collection of 200 or 300 books, kinky books, for my vanilla relatives to have to figure out what to do with. So I came up with this brilliant idea. I was going to do reread my entire library and do a book review, a video book review for my channel, so that I could share what I'd learned or some of the interesting things about all the different books. And then when I was done reading the book for the second time, I would offer it first to my patrons, and if no one on my patron group wanted the book, then I would offer it to the channel subscribers. So if you subscribe to my channel and you've watched this YouTube video and you would like to read this book and either have it for your own personal library or read it and pass it on to someone else who's kinky, then put a note down in the comments. Either put a note in the comments or write me on FetLife, and realize that I'm going to offer it to my patrons first, and then if no one takes a bite, and I can tell you from the very first book I reviewed, we reviewed the book by Devon and oh gosh, my brain is slipping. We reviewed Screw the Roses, Give Me the Thorns, which is a classic, and no one on my patron group wanted it. So one of the YouTube subscribers actually got that book. So these are going to be mailed out, media mail at the channel expense. It will cost you nothing other than an interest in also reading the book. So with that lengthy introduction, what are we going to get into today? This book is called Kink, The Shocking Hidden Sex Lives of Americans. A very provocative title by Crain Bakos. Well, who was Susan Bakos? Well, first off, when I look at the title page, the book was published, copyrighted in 1995 by St. Martin's Press, and Bakos was a writer for Penthouse in the day, Penthouse Letters, and so she would travel the country and interview people and collect data and information for Penthouse. And along her travels, the book is primarily based on interviews she had with a wide variety of kinky people. And it's interesting because it was written in 1995, and here we are in 2023. So let me give you a quick review of this book and why you might even be interested in reading a book that's this old. I think from a historical perspective, it's interesting to see where kink has come, and maybe you're new to kink and don't know what it was like in 1995. So this will give you some insights on what kink was like in that decade. But in 1995, kink was still in the closet. It was still taboo. It wasn't as much mainstream as it is today. So, you know, this describes private house parties, well-vetted leather groups, closed, secretly guarded memberships to protect the professional lives of men and women that were interested in kink that came into these groups. The whole concept of that vetting process was to protect the professionals, not necessarily to make an exclusive group, but to make a group that provided a safe haven for people to express their kink without necessarily giving up their careers. So there were many people in the book that she interviewed that were curious about kink, and the most sought after kink, or most fantasized about kink, in 1995 were 46% of all Americans, believe it or not, fantasized about having anal sex. Okay, so now out there in audience land, everyone that's experienced anal sex, whether on the giving or receiving end or both, raise your hands. Okay, my current research, about 43% of men and 37% of women have experienced anal sex. So we're not, in 1995 we were fantasizing about it. Now in 2023, 43% of men and 37% of women have experienced anal sex. In the heterosexual side of things, heterosexually oriented people experience sex 1.9 times per month on average. And in my research, I found that in the gay and lesbian community, anal sex is experienced 6.9 times per month on average. So it's interesting from a historical perspective to compare the statistics from 1999 and what people were fantasizing about with where kink has come over the decades. So the number one kinky fantasy was heterosexual anal sex. The number two kinky activity was what I call light bondage. I would describe it as tie, tease, and tickle kind of bondage. And of course, even today, I would say a large majority of the consent violations in the leather BDSM and kinky communities center around bondage in some way. Immobilizing someone, doing something to them without explicit consent to do that. So even in this book in 1995, the tie, tease, and tickle group probably dealt with consent violations more than some of the other kinks did. But there's a whole psychology behind being tied up and having kinky sex. I kind of think of it as liberation through bondage. Then the number three kink in 1995 was the chapter she described as the spanking game. There's all a broad spectrum of fetishes and games that evolve out of spanking. So SM, some of the things that she describes in the book have transcend time and decades and are true today. So I do think the book has some value. Some of it is definitely dated, but the concept of SM as foreplay as a way to lead to kinky bedroom play. Her chapter on master, mistress, and slave relationships is timeless. I didn't see a whole lot of things that had really had evaporated as far as truths about those kind of relationships. In 1995, we were still struggling with the AIDS epidemic, and so her chapter only reflected the current concern about AIDS and safety, safe sex around the gay male community and also the lesbian community. So then another chapter that really hasn't deteriorated over time was her chapter on who's really in charge, the top or the bottom. So the whole concept of topping from the bottom and the idea of gaining consent for anything you do in kinky play before it happens is really true today, if not more so than it was in 1995. So in a sense, who is in charge? Is the dominant at the top that's actually in charge of the scene really in charge if the bottom and the top have negotiated everything beforehand and it's all been consented to by the bottom, and even during the scene the bottom has control by agreed to means, whether it's green, yellow, red meaning stop the scene. So in many regards in kinky play, the bottom never relinquishes total control. There are relationships that play around with that and do that, total power exchange relationships and whatnot. But those weren't, TPE wasn't talked about in this book. There was interesting though was the chapter on finding a partner, finding a kinky partner in 1995. Involved primarily not using dating services or ads, dating ads. It involved going to munches, going to group meetings of groups, whether it was the Aspelin Society, Janus, Black Rose, or smaller regional local groups, kinky groups, and meeting people face to face. And I find in 2023, even with the internet and the ease of, communication, the big social network site FetLife, and there are other kinky dating sites, I still find the best way to find a partner in kink, the safest way to find a partner in kink, is go to a munch or go find your local leather group and meet people face to face. That face to face interaction is timeless. There was a chapter on pro-doms. Pro-doms still exist today. So it's interesting how a book that's this dated still has maintained some relevance. And from the historical perspective, I thought it was interesting to see was maybe probably the second or third book I had added to my library. It was interesting to go back in time and see what was kinky in 1995 as opposed to what is kinky today. Okay. Fetishes were talked about in the book. The most predominant fetish in 1995 were foot fetishes. Okay. Sometimes we evolve in kink and sometimes we get off on a divergent path. I think one of the most current fetishes in kink is stuffies. The littles have taken over in some parts of the country, and they have stuffy parties. I was looking on FetLife the other day, and there was a dungeon party a group was having, and they're having a stuffy adoption party. Okay, so here I am, old gray-haired. I've been throwing my bullwhip in the dungeon for 24 years, and we've evolved from foot fetishes to stuffy adoption parties. I'm not going to say foot fetishes are wrong or stuffy adoption parties are wrong. I'm going to say Kink is evolving. It continues to evolve. Who knows 20 years from now what is going to be the new fetish? I have no idea, but I will say at Test Fest here a couple weeks ago in New Jersey, the Spiel Society puts on a big convention. I wasn't able to attend, but I keep my ear to the ground on those kinds of things. And according to my friend who's a vendor, there were 12 vendors at Test Fest. And out of the 12 vendors vending all kinds of kinky wares, 3 of the 12 vendors were vending stuffies. Okay? So, we've gotten way off track. Kink, The Shocking Hidden Sex Lives of Americans by Crain Bakos. This finishes my second book review. If you're interested in reading this book, leave a note in the comment. And if you win the drawing, and I don't have a patron that asks for it, the first person that writes and raises their hand will get this book. Now, obviously, don't leave your real name and address in the comments on YouTube. If you win the drawing, we'll be in touch, and you can send me that information either to my email address or on FetLife, and I will make sure you get this book. As always, thanks for watching The Leather Journey.